This one.
I'll try. Say it quick, kua. Say it. Kua, kua. Kua, kua.
Now take that tone for A downwards.
Kua,
Go,
kua,
go,
kua, kua. It's not very
They
good.
have put it in the middle now. The tone of A you have put in the
Yes.
So can you please still decrease it?
Okay.
Go,
Kua, kua. Now I have to go first.
Go,
Kua, kua.
say
Kam ko chau kama kuana.
Let's
Ko
see.
biya khulshi.
not the bomb and leave him welcome to the bomb.
Khri.
He's very beautiful.
Scoopy. Say that again.
Why must I say I'm so happy
The
again?
camera wasn't on.
Oh. I'm so happy here.
Welcome everybody. We have a lot of different ways in which we can express ourselves today. Dunja was very clear about what she wanted from us. Dunja wanted to be cremated. She was quite fiercely anti-clerical in the last year, and she wanted a minimally religious and maximally expressive celebration of her life today. She said to me that she would be willing and wanting for me to conduct some kind of service and to give people an opportunity to express themselves about her, mostly in a way that was celebratory, since she was very much at peace with where she'd come to in her life. And as you'll hear as we go through the afternoon, up to and including this illness. So in that spirit, after a brief service, I will invite all of you to share, all of those that wish to in one way or another, your experience with us of her. So we can add to her legend. She is a legend. And honor her vibrant, authentic, and passionate life. In the history of Judaism, once the exile occurred and Jews were sent to Babylon, they couldn't perform sacrifices. And fortunately for us, Dunja did not request a sacrifice. Prayer replaced sacrifice. It was a symbolic innovation that allowed us to be portable, become people of the book. And so we'll be reading some from that book in a little while. So what we'll do today is some not so conventional things. The first thing that I thought that she'd want to start with, which is usually absolutely anathema at any kind of funeral, is Shehecheyanu. But she would certainly want us to be here. So what that prayer, I think if you look at those of you that have one of these, and if you don't, try to share with somebody. It's the first prayer right after the... And in addition to projecting, I could use some support too. So, for those that don't read Hebrew, there's alliterations, transliterations, And you can just hum if you don't want to try the words. So let's start with the Shehecheyanu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'kiyanu lazman hazeh. Blessed you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who's kept us alive, sustained us, and enabled us to reach this season or this event. And then Kaddish is used in a lot of different ways, and in this particular way we're going to do it now. It's just as a transition from one point, which is we've greeted ourselves, we've woken ourselves up, and we're going to move towards some prayer and then some Torah interpretation. Parenthetically, the portion in the next week happens to be the one in which Dina, and Dunja's Hebrew name is Dina Beryl, but Miriam Gittel and Yerachom Shagovich, and it happens to be that portion of all coincidences. I discovered that 2 days ago. So the communal Kaddish, which is on the next page, the page after the orchid, which she loved so much. And we end that section. We don't read the full section because that Pierre will do later when he does the mourner's Kaddish. So we can do this together. Yitkadal v'yitkadash mei rabah, v'yomad yivrei kuretei, v'yomlich melechon, v'chayechon uv'meichon uv'chei v'chol beit Yisrael, v'agala uv'zman kari v'imru. Amen. Hey shmei rama rora, yama mayam yitbarak. Yitbarak, 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 Yitnaseh, Yitala, Yitadel, Yitadel, Yitrisha, Yitu, the Eila, Min Kol Bichata Bashirata, Tush Bechata Banechemata, Damiran Vilma, Vimru, Amen. Now I'm going to do a tiny little call to prayer. So Dunja, here we are. Baruch hu Adonai HaMevorach, Baruch hu Adonai HaMevorach, HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed. Sadie Myra. Daddy's going to do this. Before we study Torah, we sanctify it by blessing. Amen. So we're thanking God who sanctified us and gave us the Torah so we could busy ourselves with studying the Torah. I'll just sing one line from this, just the beginning of it. Teitzeh Dina el Beit Leah asher yalda liYaakov lirot benot haaretz. Just saying, get ready. Soon you're going to be doing something like this. We see what's next.
It's the mourner's Kaddish.
Satya. Actually, before you do it, you should do the Shema. The one prayer that even Dunja couldn't stop us from doing is the Shema. If you have to say one prayer, this is the one. You're supposed to say it at least twice a day and on many other occasions. And it's really easy to remember, even for those of us who've never been or haven't been recently to any kind of communal Jewish worship. So let's do that together. Many people like to close their eyes or have an inward sense of communing with themselves together with everybody else. Shema Yisrael Adonai here.
Kadash Merabah, Omadu Bakir Tavan, Bekayan, Bekayon, Bakayat, Kobetus, Bagalas, Bankarudim, Raman. The Esmerap at Miracle Lama Maya, the Barak, the Shabak, the Far, the Tumampi, Kase, the Tadaga, Talav, the Talash, make the Shah.
Bihu.
Leila min Kobi Katav, Shur Ta, Tush Katav, Nechem Eta, Damiram, Belma, Bebru, Amen. The Eshkom Rabban, and Spaya, Bakayim, Alain, the Israel, Bebru,
Amen.
Oseh Shalom, Bimomar, Priyaseh Shalom, Alain, Bakol Israel, Bebru, Amen.
The last section, we will say Shalom Bimramav. I want us actually to sing that together, and I'll sing it for you one time. It's very easy, and a tradition in many congregations, and I hope this one, is we can actually touch each other, hold each other, touch somebody while you're doing it, so we're connected. So it's just the last 1, 2, 3 lines. Oseh Shalom Bimramav, Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Ve'imru, Amen. Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, Ve'al Kol Yisrael. So I've known Dunja since 1944, when I was born. And I've been privileged to have her love, her support, her critical input, and her open-hearted engagement for these 59 years. The contribution to me is unique and indelible. The family she came from is the Jewish story. Rabbis, scholars, merchants, musicians, athletes, politicians, gourmets and gourmands, diaspora dwellers, Zionists, atheists, agnostics, zealots, immigrants, soldiers, peaceniks, beatniks, refuseniks, tzaddiks, hippies, communists, even Republicans. Poets, artists, doctors, novelists, organizers, fundraisers, crazy people, sages, and other varieties of our extraordinary species in the very big tent of the Sagov, Ginsburg, Brzezinski-Stein clan. My rabbi in Boston says that her grandfather used to say this old saying, there are only 2 Jews in the world, and the rest is done with mirrors. My sister was one of those mirrors. She was a mirror for all kinds of people. Jews, Muslims, Hindus, black, white, yellow, any variety imaginable. She was fascinated by people. She was a magnet. She loved people. She could be overbearing, intrusive, oversensitive to criticism. She was extravagant, a Jewish princess, baroness, duchess. She offended people. She was too loud and exuberant at times. She evoked strong reactions. She did not have a mean... She didn't have a mean bone in her body. She knew how to apologize and how to love. She had severe trials throughout her life. My birth defects necessitated much surgery, which drew attention away from her, as my mother accompanied. She lost 3 children, Hazel, Georgina, and a traumatic miscarriage. No parent ever gets over such tragic losses. She was married and divorced twice. She craved emotional connection and grew through her love to attain wisdom, kindness, moral clarity, and peaceful acceptance of herself. Her capacity for joy was contagious and changed the course of so many lives. She made relationships the center of her universe and literally lived to relate. She was easily hurt and equally eager to heal any bridge of connection. She was a tropic person, not a phobic person. She moved towards things and towards life. She didn't shrink. She threw herself into the river of our lives. She made waves and whirlpools, and the ripples reverberated for her and for all of us. I had the privilege of witnessing her from my birth to her death, and I feel a sense of awe and destiny in opening this gathering to eulogize my magnificent older sister. Lately, she busied herself with appreciating her grandchildren, Joshua and Jesse. She catalogued their achievements, developmental leaps, nuances of their personality, and her infectious delight in her involvement with them, and with her conversations, and what they thought and felt. She had great taste in people, in things and the arts. She had a fantastic bullshit detector for insincerity, and an unerring attraction to excellence and quality of character. She was also enjoying her niece Sadie's burgeoning expertise with Torah reading, and exhorted her to project herself and express her excellence. Last year she made, in a characteristic gesture, some of us think these things, she did them. She actually gave Sadie a paid commission because she saw that Sadie painted ceramic plates beautifully. So she asked her to make her a dinner service and paid for it. And Sadie, really, and then she wanted more dishes, and she recently was wanting more, and unfortunately not be able to get them. She was pleased to hear about Alex's improvements in her circumstances and in her taking better care of herself and being a courageous single mom. I could spend days recounting stories and memories and reactions, and we'll need to do that through the day and forever. But in this formal part, I want to conclude by talking a little about her grace, dignity, intelligence, and moral grandeur while dying. She called me on September the 23rd, 2003, from her doctor's office after the ultrasound revealed the pancreatic cancer. From that point on, she planned her course, preparing for the worst and hoping for the best. We all responded to her plight with love and support, and she made our task so easy. She received what we offered with sweetness, clarity, and gratitude. We shared her sadness, her farewell expressions. When I asked her what she was sad about, she said she was sad to say goodbye to people. She was not afraid of dying, and she didn't fear oblivion or any of the many things many of us might think about when we contemplate dying. She was sad about leaving all of you. Expressions of serenity, honesty, courage, and menschlichkeit to the last breath. I want to thank all the people that visited her and stroked her and fed her. She was so nourished by those expressions. And we, the intimate family caretakers, were also so helped. Food that people brought, the feelings that were shared, the openness to our selves. We love you, Dunja, and you will always inspire us by the way you lived and died. I know if I don't die in a violent or sudden death, I will reference how she died. She showed me how to die. You made a difference in our world, and we are truly blessed to have known you.
I just hope to read my mom's speech. She would turn 93 in a month, and she asked me to help her with this one. Dear Dunja, we met you in early 60s when you came with your parents to visit us in Soviet Union, Riga. It was incredible experience. You came as a storm, hurricane. It's such a rebel who was completely disrespected to authority. It was so strange for all of us being oppressed. Never say no to authority, to see someone who was used every opportunity express this disrespect to many things, to going to microphones in hotel and specifically saying everything she thought about communism and things like that. We thought that it is strange for us being there in Soviet Union. We realized that even here in New York, she still was a rebel. We continue our relationship specifically after we came to this country, and you help us to, for some of us, to renew our knowledge of Jewish history, for younger generation actually to learn a lot, and try to keep our family connections, try to keep all cousins, and we have many people who the only place we used to meet was in Dunja's house. We used to come to various Jewish holidays, Dunja's birthday, and meet a lot of interesting people we probably will never meet in the rest of our life. And actually everyone felt so good. It was a celebration of life, and it's actually a celebration of Dunja who managed to attract this type of people. And the last time my mother saw Dunja was a couple of months ago. It was probably Roy's birthday, and it was a small concert here with Roy and Stanley playing and others. And Dunja was so beautiful, so excited, so, bright. And this is the last thing what my mama remember about Dunja, and we hope everyone will remember Dunja the way she was at that time, and many other times people saw her bubbling with life. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Geshe.
Thank you, Auntie Gessia. Okay. I wrote about a piece called Dunja at the End. I can't believe she's dead, even though I witnessed her rapid decline with my own eyes. My beautiful, exotic, one-of-a-kind big sister. How could she die, age 62, after little more than 2 months of illness? It's just too much to bear, and I'll never get over this. Her body has been consumed, now divided into 6 neat packets of ashes, ready for casting into the winds of the significant places where she lived and loved. New York City and upstate, Cape Town and the African bush. Her powerful personality has influenced me profoundly throughout my life, and I dare say our internal dialogues, private jokes, and struggles will continue unabated forever. The experience of being with her through to the end has helped me to realize how our bodies are simply vessels, and once we cross over, as we all must do, that only unadulterated true love transmission remains at the end. She really wanted and appreciated my help, and I'm so happy that I could be available to supply what support I could. That goes for all the other volunteer carers on the rota: Barry Sachs from Cape Town, Olivia Pallenstein from Toronto, Jenny Schock from London, Susan Boster from London, Catherine Raffaeli from Botswana, Janet Catherine from Hartbeespoort. Also, there were so many neighbors and friends who constantly called and came by: Ellen Frankel, Ernie and Jerry Drucker, Penny and Mark Kreitzer-Rittenberg, Carmel Schwerer, Judith van der Merlen, Mayor and Marcia Urinovsky, Amanda Lee and Michael Spencer, to name just some of them. There were literally dozens calling constantly, emailing, coming round with chicken soup and sympathy. Other members of our New York family also came bearing gifts and offering help. Cobba and Luda Friedman and their sons, Valdi and Reva Friedman, Bruce Fogel and Samantha Fogel, Karina Eichenberg. Also, I want to thank Annie Janssen, who was able to come at short notice from Cape Town to live in here and help out with the domestic load at the behest of the Velks family. It was a unique outpouring of love for one individual who so often felt beset with existential loneliness in her life, despite her ample Rolodex. There were also some kind nurses and a home health aide who visited from the St. Vincent Support Services and who helped ease some of the dreadful bureaucracy which seems to surround healthcare in the USA. It definitely helped in the final days of her life that our brother Stanley was close at hand to give shots and organize the medications. Dunja was positively regal. She always played the queen bee and placed herself at the very center of our attention, long before this terrible illness made it a necessity. At times in her life, she drove us crazy with her chutzpah and impossible demands for our love and absolute focus. She herself had been emotionally scarred by the tragic separate losses of her daughters before she was 35. Underneath her sometimes brittle front, she was actually very fragile. She could cheerfully hop any queue, persuade any reluctant doorman to admit her into the roped-off VIP section. She could become a seductive and unstoppable force, a battle axe crossed with an Amazon, disguised as a bird of paradise. She had a serial succession of husbands and boyfriends throughout her life, but she complained that she was always too much for them after a while. It seems to me so poignant that she got it together this year with Ray Blue, a sax-playing gentle giant, after quite a prolonged lonesome spell. He was in attendance during her illness, having flown twice at short notice from Germany to be with her. Unfortunately, he arrived on Monday evening this week, for one day only, several hours after she had died. He had to return to his European tour straight away and therefore could not be here today. He is heartbroken and I feel very sorry for him too. Her extraordinary presence, charm, humor, interest and intelligence were her saving grace. One could forgive all her excesses once she burst out laughing in that crazy cackle. She was impulsive, generous, devoted, and deliriously over the top. No one could ever forget her. She always made an impression. She never inspired indifference. She had charisma in spades. She certainly was a legend in her own living room and several others besides. Her unerring eye and taste was impeccable. She always went straight for the choicest item in the pile. Now we have to figure out what to do with all her collections. She taught and showed a lot of people how to live in style, and I have to add also how to die gracefully. Close to death, she became luminous, magnetic, and more beautiful. In death, her face was peaceful and finally relaxed into a faint smile. Throughout most of the past 2 months since she got sick, she was gracious, uncomplaining, stoic, and clear-sighted about her destiny. She even wrote me an email which began by quoting Groucho Marx. "Hello, I just called to say goodbye, haha." She was feistily unafraid of dying. She just didn't want to suffer unduly or to be artificially kept alive. She didn't want people to cry and get sentimental around her. She actively hated that. If anyone happened to burst into tears when they came to visit, they were summarily dismissed and advised to return only once they had composed themselves. She said she had done everything she had wanted to do in her fabulous life and faced her death as a brave warrior queen would have done. She had previously been at great pains to put her affairs in order. She had made a living will and had organized all the relevant proxies and property assignments she wished to make. Her instincts were always uncannily spot on, and this time, sadly, they were all too accurate. In March of this year, I humored her by accompanying her to a lawyer's office in Cape Town in order to redo her South African will, never dreaming that it would be enacted so quickly. She definitely had a presentiment of impending ill health and acted accordingly. She repeatedly told me over the past few years that she knew that she wasn't going to live long, a notion which I pooh-poohed at the time as hypochondriac nonsense. I was so wrong. She passed on various responsibilities to me over the past year. We made a wonderful trip together in March to Johannesburg so that I could learn about some property we had jointly inherited there, which she had been managing for the past 14 years. Now I'm the one who'll have to go there every year to check up. She experienced some pain and discomfort during her illness, notably abdominal pain, pressure in her upper chest, extreme nausea, indigestion and reflux, swelling and redness in her extremities. Her eyesight became affected and she found it difficult to concentrate on anything for very long. She would frequently get tired and breathless. She had jaundice at first, which made her furiously itchy. She couldn't sleep very well, and eventually she couldn't walk, lie down, eat or drink at all. Pancreatic cancer is a terrible and cruel illness. The only blessing was that once it did take hold, it progressed very quickly, so she didn't have to suffer for too long. She was placed on a panoply of medications, which required her carers to calibrate and constantly readjust the dosages as the prescriptions changed, sometimes daily. At first she hoped for surgery. When that was ruled out, her fighting instincts led her to seek out the experimental program at Columbia Presbyterian, pretty much against her own doctor's advice. She was on medicines to control nausea, pain, anxiety, swelling, diabetes, itching, sleep, rashes, etc., etc. These served to make her very confused at times, and she so hated the idea of losing it. The chemotherapy was utter hell, and I really don't know now if it was worthwhile doing. I think it undoubtedly did make her feel a lot sicker because it's so toxic. Nonetheless, the cancer galloped on inexorably. Suddenly, after the last 10 days or so of her life, she started to deteriorate quickly. As her digestive system started to pack in, it became more and more difficult to administer the medicines. We had to call 911 on Sunday night, the 23rd, and she went by ambulance into St. Luke's ER, where she received intensive care in the form of hydration and blood transfusions over the course of 2 days. Thanks to young Dr. Grant Lipman, our resident mole at St. Luke's, who came in specially, even though he was off duty, he was very helpful to Dunja that night. She was intermittently delirious and confused and paranoid because of the morphine, especially in the night time. Once she stabilized and the bad result of the endoscopy on Tuesday, the 25th, was revealed, she decided not to return to Columbia for any more treatment. It was quite a performance to unplug her from the drips, etc., and spring her from the hospital, but we did manage to get her home by Wednesday morning. Her ability at the end to surrender control to us as her carers was a great personal resolution of the central conflict of her life. Only pure love via human contact afforded any comfort. Hugs, cuddles, holding, simple human kindness, not much talking. Helping her to stay clean and dignified, helping her walk around the apartment. Finally, she became like a child, trusting and dependent, whereby she could only lean forward in the sitting position, resting against one of us. Late on Sunday afternoon at about 5:10 p.m., she fell into a coma, and at last she was able to recline, which she had not been able to do for a few days prior. Once that happened, she no longer responded to her name being called, nor did she move nor change her position till she died the next morning at 10:40 a.m. She had been laying on her side, breathing deeply, as if the motor was still running, but without any consciousness. We've tried to enact her specific and detailed wishes about the funeral, which she relayed to me the very first time we spoke about her diagnosis. She asked to be cremated. She wanted a party with music, tributes, and celebration. She didn't want a formal religious service, so we invented our own version. We'll do another memorial service in Cape Town in due course. The co-residents of her Cape Town apartment building have voted to create a memorial garden at street level, planted with indigenous fauna. She provided all of us with a model for living and an object lesson in dying. A truly remarkable person. Even if she had not been my blood sister, I'm sure we would have gotten along. I'll miss her calling for me. Margala, she'd say. I'm not sure which number Binkelrood I now rank. Probably number 4 after Pierre and the boys. So this is our goodbye to Dunja. Rest in peace, my darling sister.
Beautiful, Margot. Beautiful. Really beautiful.
What do you believe about the sun, the wind, and the rain? What do you think of the starry night and the light-filled day? Do you believe that they are natural forces, or do you believe that something of them represents something else? I believe that when we step into a new moment, we could be living the life of something else, for every moment is different. Change is happening all the time. Pain, happiness, sadness, and gaiety are all examples of triggers for change. I know that we are all here to celebrate somebody who made a change in all of us. Her personality was amazing, generosity flowing, telling what they must and mustn't do. But now as we are still changing, we are healing and we know. But healing is a process that takes much time. I thank everybody for being here today, among a few who are Stanley, Margot, and Pierre, and everybody else who are such a strong circle around this wonderful person. And now as I come to a closure, I know that you have heard me, and I hope that you will feel that Dunja heard me, for today we have a mighty wind.
To honor her and myself. Spent many Jewish holidays with her, many Passovers, and I'll tell you, the Haggadah is shit compared to Dunja's story of the Jews. She made history sound more fascinating. She made life seem more interesting if it wasn't quite that. She was the most vibrant person I've ever known, actually. She invited me always to come here when there was an artist, a writer, a musician. She said, I must come because it would enrich my life in some way, and it always did. And she was also responsible for my first trip to Africa. Whatever she didn't arrange, she took responsibility for arranging. I just accepted it. Appropriately enough, any of my friends who have never met Dunja, and many have, all know about her because she's the one family member of mine that I just get a kick out of telling people about. Everett and her got married in my home when I was a child in Alpine.
How old were you?
I don't know, I was young. The one thing I remember was, how could she actually is marrying somebody as kooky as her.
You asked for it.
There's a good story about that too, actually.
And I appreciate that she didn't really want tears and all that, but I feel so sad about her passing, and yet I hear her laughing, that contagious, beautiful laugh she had, and I feel so blessed that she was a part of my life, and I flooded with memories every time I'm here listening to people. I mean, I remember in high school, while my parents were so encouraging of my education, it was Dunja that stayed up with me till 5 in the morning to write my papers. You must come over and we will write all night. And she did. Never called her before 12, and I could always call her at 2 a.m. And I just want to thank her for being in my life and making it that much richer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
An aunt that was really great to have and sometimes really hard to have. I remember, I think I'll remember her phone number for the rest of my life. That doesn't make sense to you, but it does to me. Jenny was truly my auntie man. And for all the times that I was embarrassed to have her as my aunt or wish she would just shut up and leave me alone, I want to say right now that I'm truly proud to be her niece and hope that I, in my own life, could conduct myself with as much dignity and commitment to being a good person and live my life well. I love her very much, and I'm very sorry that she's not with us.
I'm Carmel Schreier. I've been Dunja's friend forever. She used to call me her sister, but I'm not. And I'm not her cousin, and I'm not related to the Sagovs, except through the most disastrous marriage link in the world. But that's not my fault. That's not my fault. I was friendly. Dunja and I grew up together. I was born 2 weeks after her in Cape Town, South Africa. Our mothers were extremely close friends. My mother actually was best friends with Myra's sister, Jessie, another rebel in the world of Cape Town, which you didn't have to be that rebellious to be called a rebel. But the Gudinski sisters was something else in Cape Town, of which Dunja's mum was one of them. And our fathers grew to know each other in the most extraordinary exchange which Stanley was talking about recently. My father made Raymond Sagov learned, and in exchange, Raymond Sagov made my father rich. My father was a surgeon in Cape Town who, at the age of 49, had a disastrous stroke. It cut him off completely from his work, completely. There's nothing worse you can have than a stroke at 49. He lived to 86, but that doesn't matter. At 49, this terrible thing happened. And Raymond Sagov came to the hospital and said to my father, Raymond knew exactly what this meant, and he said to my father, Toddy, my checkbook is yours. Just like that. Just like that. I don't think my father ever wrote checks on Raymond's account, but within a year or two, what could have been a financial disaster was turned to a financial miracle when Raymond became one of the first men in South Africa through sheer brilliant business acumen. Our links with the Sagovs go back a long, long way. And then we ended up in the same place. Our lives diverged enormously. I remember at 18 going to Dunja's wedding to Gerald Seremba. I, as usual, was wearing the tightest dress possible, and no one asked me to dance. Shortly after that, I stopped going to weddings in South Africa by virtue of going to another country. But Dunja looked gorgeous. She looked lovely. I remember her dancing at the wedding with your dad. And I would see her when I came back to Cape Town. Oh, right. Right. So I remember those hard times they were good times in South Africa, but then there was a real hard time with Hazel. Dunja and I talked about everything. There was nothing Dunja said that I wouldn't argue with. Sometimes I used to be so tired of what I had to say. This expression someone said, that Dunja used to say, I'm too much for these men. I'm just too much for them. She used to say, I'm telling you, I'm too much for him. I would argue that one. If you think that's easy, I would argue absolutely every single thing. She truly loved you, Pierre, and these boys were the apple of her eye. She used to tell me on and on, having no grandchildren myself, but she would tell me on and on about, and in fact, we got married in September, so early September we went for a walk down Broadway so we could buy things for them, and she was telling me about them. We bought one of them a puzzle, and we bought another one a Game Boy thing, and the idea was we buy these gifts and my son Reuben will take them when he goes on honeymoon to South Africa. I said, no, Reuben's not that great about remembering to take things, and on his honeymoon, how can you give him parcels? She said, he will do it. My children are absolutely devastated by this, and my daughter wrote me this email. It's just an email. She doesn't know I'm going to read it to anyone, but I'd like to share it with you. I have two kids. Bill and I have two kids, Reuben and Nina. And Dunja was, when my sister Tamer died, Reuben needed a godmother, and Dunja was Reuben's godmother. And she was like a godmother to both of the children. We are not talking about a uneventful relationship with them. She would fight with them, she'd phone them up, they'd argue with her, and at the same time they had this wonderful, wonderful relationship with her. And this is what my daughter Nina writes to me a couple of days ago. Reuben and I agreed last night that Dunja was the most unforgettable woman that we know. We spoke about how much we loved her, and knew she loved us and how special she was. I thought how she signed into the hospital with artist as her vocation. And I know you're going to be reminded of this on Saturday when you see the enormous network of loved ones and friends that she not only created, but nurtured and maintained. They were her life and her scene, and this was her art. Like any artist's work, reflecting the pain and the joy, the phases and the fashions of her life and of her mind. You could look at her oeuvre in eras. The Evert period, the dope days, Africa in Manhattan. I love this idea that memories of Dunja could almost be curated as though they were her body of work. I shall never forget laughing and crying with her. She was for me and Reuben a revelation, to discover that we had her, like the flip side of the coin of our mother. This ferociously hip and hilarious character living in the coolest city. Someone who shared all our references from pre-childhood straight through to wild adulthood. We lay on her cushioned couch and we watched the world walk in and out the door.
I want to tell 4 stories about her, in the hope that people will start telling stories about her, because a legend is built on stories. I speak as one of her, I don't know, maybe about 8 husbands. She didn't marry them all. I'm one of the ones she married. And I also speak as someone she helped. There are probably many amongst us here whom she helped. When we lived together, she used to bring people in here like birds with broken wings. They'd live in that room, that room, or that room. And she'd fix them up in a few months. And she'd send them away, stronger and better. That's what happened to me. Of course, she did it not like a Freudian shrink. It was more like, you must go and see, you must do this, you must, you must, you must. And it worked. In a few months, they'd be fixed up. 4 stories. A story she told me about maybe the most contentious and combative and damaging and loving relationship she had was with her dad. And she told me this story when she was a kid. She'd done something and he was after her, he was going to give her a hiding. She ran out the house. He was wearing a white suit, and she climbed a tree to get away from him. And he stood there fulminating and calling her names under the tree and cursing her for the devil she was and whatever. And it was a raspberry tree. Mulberry tree. So she picked mulberries and threw them at him. So he left the battlefield with his white suit stained with little red dots all over. How we started going out. I'd heard about her basically before I met her. She's that kind of person. But I think I met her in the first time in the Ice Palace in Cape Town. I don't know if any of you. It's like this. It was this beautifully art-directed place that was ahead of its time. But then I met her in Johannesburg. I walked into a gay bar, Something, I don't know if everybody knows this about it, she was the most superb and greatest fag hag of them all. She just, in fact, one of her husbands was a gay guy, whom she lived with for 7 years. And you must not sleep with men while you're with me, right? And he didn't. So I walk into this gay bar. It's like a long thing, and the bar is right at the end. And there's a woman dressed in some exotic ensemble like she could dress in, lying on the bar counter, holding forth with drinks and gays and everything all around her. That was the kind of person she was, center of attention. While we were married, another story. You were there. We were in Boston. It was like 11 o'clock at night. We were driving around. We were hungry. I think it was about 4 or 5 or 6 of us. And there was nothing. It wasn't New York. It was Boston. There wasn't a place open. It was 11 o'clock, and we drive, and we see a restaurant across the street. And there's about 6 guys outside the restaurant, you know, and they're pulling down those steel gate things, right, to lock up for the night. Dunja says, stop! Stop! She runs out. She runs across the street. She talks to them for like half a minute, and the things are going out. She comes back and we go, what the hell did you say to them? I mean, we actually had a meal and everything. She says, I told them, speaking to me, I told them you were a famous Czechoslovakian film director. You can't speak a word of English. You're here to make a film, and it's their duty to make America look good to this famous foreigner. That was it. And then the last story to show that she stayed herself to the end, or to a few days before the end. I was there on Friday, before the Monday that she died. And we talked, and it was good. And at one point, she could still walk then. She flounced out of the bed and said, make the bed! And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, how do you want me to make the bed? I said. Without missing a beat on her way out, she said, military style! That's my story.
I'll just bring it down a peg or two. I'm not a Sagov, I'm not a relative or a cousin, and I've only known Dunja for 26 years. And I put a few words down because I live next door. My name is Ellen Frankel. Right after Dunja came to live at 680, 26 years ago, she came to our annual party and had such a good time, as she always did. She and Evert were the last to leave. Will anyone ever forget the way she danced? I remember that particularly because it was all new to me. This exotic creature with her Issey Miyake clothes had come into our lives. After that, whenever one of us had a crowd, as today, or we had the apartment painted, we moved our furniture between 3A and 3B and used each other's kitchen, as again we've done today. If you can imagine having a neighbor who did not mind if you moved your grand piano into their living room for a few days every year, you'll know what our relationship was. We laughed a lot, and our lives were linked in an uncommon way. I was telling Margot that this is the first Thanksgiving in many years that I have roasted my turkey in my own oven. Dunja would leave the door open all night so I could come in early to use her oven and use my own for the other things for Thanksgiving. No way was she going to get up at 8 a.m. to let me in. Her family was with us for Thanksgiving and Christmas, and at Passover we were at her parents' and then later here. Family dramas, and you know there were many of them, were shared events. She was the person my children went to if they needed someone and we were not home. As my son Shepard recently wrote to her, he found inspiration for his artwork and career in her apartment. My son Dylan found a sympathetic ear, and he was a devil who needed one, and a fascinating friend. And my daughter Elizabeth, who is here today, grew up with Pierre and with Dunja's special guidance. I introduced Dunja to Fire Island. she guided me around Table Mountain. She would come blowing into my apartment regularly with the latest news on some political front, or with stories to tell about places she'd been and people she'd met. She was always sure she knew the best and the brightest. Was there ever a moment that she did not have an opinion? I'm not aware of it. She was always telling me also what I had to do. I was her secretary when she was in South Africa. She was my cook and counsel when I needed it. 680 will never be the same.
So we had, I don't even remember how many people at our home, including your father-in-law and mother-in-law. And we're prepared to have the ceremony, and the rabbi looks at the marriage license and says, we just can't marry these people here. This is a New York license, and the law won't allow it. We're in the state of New Jersey. Well, we'd all had a whole bunch to smoke and drink and whatever else. And we piled into my Jeep, rabbi included. And I don't remember, who else was with us?
King K, the photographer.
Oh, and the photographer.
Without film.
There was no film in the camera. It was so stoned. The photographer was so stoned, he forgot to load the camera.
We have no photograph.
He took some great shots there. So we headed down the Palisades Parkway, and we're about to cross the George Washington Bridge. And I primed the rabbi, and Dunja then took over, and the photographer was snapping pictures. And as we passed the sign that said, "Entering New York," I warned him that we didn't have a lot of time. We had to spin around. Dunja said, "Okay, get on with it, get on with it." She was screaming. We had the ceremony, we circled back, headed back to Alpine, where Raymond was beside himself as to whatever did happen. And oh, that was so. I'm going to miss Dunja terribly. I was mad as hell at her often, not the least of which was just recently, and it's impossible for me to ever stay angry at her for a very long time. We're not going to let her down in the family, I hope, and I can only speak for myself and encourage the rest of the family and, of course, all of her friends as well, in terms of letting all those relationships that she brought together fall apart. Dunja, I love you and I'll miss you. Thank you.
I encourage everybody to do that. So Joshua's going to play, in keeping with the change in government and dispensation in South Africa, a tune he learned without much fanfare, Nkosi Sikelele.
My dear, our love is here to stay. Together we're going a long, long way. In time the Rockies may crumble, Gibraltar may tumble, they're only made of clay. Our love is here to stay.
Okay. Are you gonna kiss me goodnight? My hand. Don't. Can I kiss your hand? Maybe your arm. Now. Good night. Night. Sylvia, the two grannies. We washed his hair. He lay in a special bath seat. You'll have to take another picture of that. And then we took him in a beautiful towel wrapped up, and he cried, and I said to him, Sylvia's getting your bottle, and he stopped crying.
Take it out so I can see his face.
You won't let me.
What do you mean won't let you? You're bigger than him.
No, you won't.
You'll probably start screaming.
Yeah.